What's the hardest lesson you ever had to learn?
Soul teachers.
Conversations that reach deep into the soul.
We provide a place for our guests to tell stories that seek the sacred, allow space for transformation.
Create a tolerant community.
It's Soul Teachers.
I'm speaking today by telephone to Ira Wagler, who's the author of the New York Times bestseller, Growing Up Amish. He's been a farmer, a runaway, and a lawyer. He's a graduate of Bob Jones University, and he holds an honorary doctorate from Vincennes University, where he also earned an associate degree. Today, he's working on a second memoir while he works as general manager of Graber Supply, a pole builder, building supplier, and builder. Although he left the Amish, I think they're still very much part of him, a contradiction I hope to explore today. We're incredibly honored to have you with us, Ira.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. I'm very honored to be here. I really am, and it's great to finally really sit down and talk to you.
Yeah, welcome to Soul Teachers.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm honored.
So, before I move into your childhood, I'm just curious. Your honorary doctorate from your alma mater, that was a great picture of you giving a speech. What was it like getting that?
Oh, I tell you. You know what? I find it fascinating that you actually see what that is. You know, other people are just, you know, I mean, you know what that is.
Yeah.
It's a funny thing because I graduated. I had no high school whatsoever, so I got a GED, went to Vincennes University. They gave me my doctorate years later. Went to Bob Jones, went to law school. So I graduated 3 different times. You know,
Wow.
I walked across 3 different stages.
Yeah.
And all 3 of those stages, somebody got an honorary doctorate, and all of us students were like, just get the guy off the stage. All we want is like a you know?
Yeah.
And so when the time came, you know, I got this call from the president of the of Vincennes. You know, it was in the spring of 2012. The book had just come out the previous summer. You know, there they were already. And chatted with me a while, and I said, oh, absolutely. I said, you know, but then when I hung up, I was like, you know what? I mean, it just sank in. I am being offered an honorary doctorate, and that is a big freaking deal.
Yeah, it is.
You know? So I went out. You know, it was so funny because I'm not particularly, you know, I'm not academia, whatever. I just drive a pickup truck and whatever. But that day, you know, I went back. They traveled back there. They treated me like royalty.
Yeah.
And that day, I joined those people. I wore that robe, and I made the speech, and it was just fantastic. I loved it. Came home and hung up my stuff and went back to being who it was, you know?
Yeah.
It was just great. It was a real honor.
Well, I had not seen that before. One of the things that I think is interesting about your writing is you're very much an sort of folksy sort of guy. Like, you do not brag about your sort of education, and I understand why that is, in part because of who your audience is. But it was really interesting to sort of, as I looked at the research, and I finally saw, oh, okay, that's where his education went. So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I want to look a bit at how you. I want to look a bit at how you view the Amish. So, as you know, I came out of a conservative Mennonite world, and I certainly have opinions about my childhood experience with God and with religion, and I know you too. And I just wondering if I could push a little further into sort of where you come from in terms of your own relationship to your background.
Okay.
One of your blogs mentioned your belief, and I'm sort of quoting you, that Amish have, quote, a dead heart of stone. Do you remember writing that by any chance?
Well, in my last, I guess it was my last blog, I wrote about a specific thing that happened, and it's some of the hardcore Amish, you know, what happened was I have a relative, fairly distant relative, and never met her, just know her. Her mother passed away. She and her husband had left the Amish and, you know, were, you know, Mennonite or whatever. They drove a car. She was not allowed to go to her own mother's funeral. They would not let her in.
Wow.
So you think about that. That's a heart of stone. You know, that is. But it's not all of them. It's not near all of them.
Right.
And in that writing, I rebuked those Amish. I said that that they need to repent from their wicked ways, and may the Lord rebuke you. I spoke that to them. So
Right.
to that element of that culture, I'm extremely harsh, but to the culture overall, I have tremendous reverence and respect for.
Yeah. Yeah. So that brings me to my next question. If you had a choice, if you could go back and be born again into the world as a child, do you think you would still choose to have been born Amish?
That is so hard, because I look at, especially in today's, in any period of time, it's such a complex thing, because on the one hand, this is where I come from, this is the world I know, okay? I can tell you all these stories, and I can tell you all this, and it's beautiful, and it's sad, and it's all these things, elements that make a story. On the other side is something I have never known and never seen, and what would that have been, and what would, to go to high school. Well, I never had one day in my life. I never played any organized sport, never, and you look at that, and it's like, you know what? I might choose to be Amish, but I probably would choose to try the other side. I don't know. I just don't know. That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I was just thinking about, I actually have a sister who had just a wonderful voice and would have probably done really well in musical theater had she had that opportunity in high school, but we didn't have that. We didn't have, I teach in a public high school. I've taught in several public high schools, and I see the opportunities the kids have, and I think back to the fact that I went to a small, private Christian high school, and it was just very different. We didn't have the sorts of things that they have in normal high schools today. So for me, that was...
I understand completely.
That's pretty fascinating. I asked that question in part because I've asked the question to myself, and I'm not sure what I would have chosen.
I know. I look at, you and I have fairly unique stories coming, and the other thing about the blessing to the time that we are born in, you and I both, is that there's actually a market for our stories. There's a myriad, tens of millions of people out there that could write this story, write it as well or better, but not from the unique experiences that we had. And it's not marketable, or very hard, much harder to market, So you look at that, would I choose to be born Amish so I can write my story later? I don't know. Those are all things that they're all things that would have to come into the equation.
Yeah. One of the things that really hit me as well, and I think I've written about this, but we have our very specific sort of fundamentalist background, but there are also people who have grown up with Mormons, similar sort of thing, fundamentalist Islam. I mean, these religions sort of all share that sort of like separation from the world, and we are not part of the world. Another question: if you could tell me one thing you got from the experience of growing up Amish, like what's the one thing you think that you got that you would never want to have left behind?
Well, I was talking to another person not too long ago about that. Pretty much that's that same issue. And if I chose one thing, it would probably be the work ethic. Just talking about, okay, faith is great. All these things are maybe co-equal, but to come out of that culture, and I know that you come out of a culture that knows what work is. Most of society today has no concept. Nothing compared to what our cultures, both our cultures, know. And that is so rare and so unique anymore that it's one of the reasons that I'm so fiercely proud of my people. I call them my people. They are my people, and so fiercely leave them alone. I didn't want to live that way, but you leave them alone. If they want, they can make whatever choices they want. That's just how it is.
You know, you're one of the only memoir writers I've read who struggled with some of the same things I did in this way. There was a certain cycle that repeated itself. You left, you returned, you left again. And I know you talk about why in the memoir, but as you look back on it now with some distance from the memoir, and I had the same experience, by the way. What do you think kept pulling you back? You'd come back, then you'd leave. You'd come back. What was that?
Well, I think the reason it happens so incessantly, for most people, I don't know how many times you came back and left. A lot of people do it. Many do that one time. They're gone. They know it when they leave. A lot of them do it in two tries. The second time they're sure. And for me, probably the reason that I remember the details that I remember and can write as I write about them is it was that sensitivity. I want to give it everything I got, and to always, of course, and this might be part of the artist or whatever it is, to whichever world you're in, you brood about the one you left.
Yeah.
So there was some of that, and of course there were economic issues. The economy, I've always thought back to, the early 80s, late 79, 80, 81, in that era, it was tough. But the actual economy was hard. You couldn't just go out and find a job, or you had to have connections and stuff. So that might have been, part of it too, is like, it's hard out here. So the security of the community and the good things, there were beautiful things there, but they were so stifling, overall.
Yeah. No, I'm right there beside you. Those were definitely issues that I was struggling with as well. I found it really interesting that one of the writers that I've looked at, and I'm trying to remember her name right now, she literally started something called Pathways for Jewish Hasidic people who left, because they'd leave the community. They wouldn't know how to get a job. They didn't know how to have a checkbook. All of their contacts were back within the Jewish community. And it was one of the most difficult things about leaving, and people would literally return because their entire connections were back in the Amish. We're back with Hasidic people.
Right. No, I understand that completely.
I'm wondering, I guess the last question before we take a break is, I've listened to you talk with admiration about the Amish, and you call them my people. Do you ever wonder whether you made a mistake leaving the Amish? Have you ever wished, like, I wish I wouldn't have had that sort of wanderlust? I wish I would have just been content to live within the Amish people and live out that sort of peaceful life.
No, I can say I have never, in the resolution of my first book, where I'm actually leaving them for the first time in peace, in my heart. From that moment, I have never, ever looked back other than to, look at the story, reflect, remember fondly, much of it. But the choice to leave, just like, no. And I've often said, if I was back there to, 17, 18 and knew even, not what I know now, but, more than I did, I would try to make it in 2 attempts, instead of those 3 or 4. It's an emotional roller coaster, not only for me, but for my family. It's just boom, 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 boom. It just didn't stop. So those would, if I could make a rational choices and they would come true, I would just say, well, this time let me do it in 2 tries, instead of 5. So something like that is about the only thing that I would change.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk about Ira's experience as an author and why he chooses to avoid talking about politics these days. Are you looking to sell your house? You can't do better than Windermere on Vashon, and in particular, Mary Margaret Briggs, realtor at Windermere. When my wife and I decided to sell our house, I went straight to Mary Margaret. She supports the arts and education here in our little town. In fact, when my students didn't go to her to buy an ad, she sent me a reminder. As our agent, she has gone over and above. She actually came out and weeded our flower beds during the final rush. Plus, the house was gorgeously staged. So when you sell your house, go with the best. Go with Mary Margaret Briggs and start your next chapter with Windermere. We're back in the Soul Teacher studio with Ira Wagler, author of the New York Times bestseller Growing Up Amish. Before we went on break, we talked about his experience in leaving, and I want to talk a bit this time about the book that he's currently working on. So, Ira, how far are you out from being finished with the book, do you think?
Oh, well, the second journey is always, different than the first one. This one here is, the story could be rather lengthy, but see, what happened was when the first book took off, then all of a sudden the market clamors that you immediately come out with another one.
Yeah.
And so, like, the iron's hot, let's get another one out here. And they talked to me about it. This was in 2012. And I said, I'll see what I can do. And I messed around for a month, and I said, nope. I said, I cannot force myself to do anything at this point. So I'm going to go back to my blog. When I have something worth telling you, I'll tell you,
Mm-hmm.
And it went years and years, and I don't know. And so anyway, my agent shopped it around. Last year, I signed the contract pretty much about a year ago, I think. It's when it was.
Mm-hmm.
Might have been in November a year. I don't know. About right out a year ago. Originally, it was supposed to be pretty much wrapped up by the summer, and then I don't know. It was just, there's some straight, I don't know. It's just different.
Sure. And it's interesting that one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you was I felt that we could actually talk about the writing process just a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, and just to let my readers know, like, by all reports, your first book, Growing Up Amish, was really successful. I mean, I think there were like 250,000 copies sold, isn't that right?
I think it's around 200,000 is what the number is approaching at this point. I just tell people around 200. But yeah, it's in print after, how many years, 7 years on its own, it's still in print. So that tells you something,
You've talked about the importance of your blog at www.irawagler.com, and I've often visited your blog, and I see the incredible engagement you get from your readers. You've said that it started before anything, and you seem to love it, and I know what a blog does for readers. They really get to connect with you, but I'm just curious, what do you get from the blog? Why is it so critical for you?
Well, it's kind of funny because on the one hand, I'm trying to work on this is the manuscripts in quotation marks or whatever. This is the manuscript over here. I'm writing all this. All of a sudden, I'm like, I need to go write something immediate, fun. No, nothing other than just simply, I want to do it. It's an exercise, and it's an exercise. It's good practice for one thing, but it's just that's where I started, and it's just like I can always be honest there, and trust me, you dig all the way back to the very beginning and see where I was when I launched this thing, and work my way through and forward, and you'll see some pretty dark, honest stuff. It's just that's how you write.
Yeah.
You don't write hurtful. Don't get me wrong. I'm not hurtful, but honest.
Yeah.
And so that's where I can do that, is in the blog and the book. That kind of. The first book kind of, that was my biggest fear, pretty much. They had read my stuff, they read my blog, all that, and I was like, when I had written all this stuff, turned it in, and they were going to return to edits, I was like, Lord, please let them have kept my voice. I didn't know, because I just, and back came these drafts, and they had kept it, and I was so relieved, because that's one of the things I've always, when I do talk about writing, you had asked about that earlier. And maybe it's a new style or whatever. I just tell readers that when you're doing a blog or when you're writing a story, like in class you have rules, but when you're writing on the blog or in the market, try to write like you talk. Just don't worry about the English rules. How do you talk around your kitchen table?
Yeah.
Write that way.
Yeah.
So that's worked for me.
I want to just very briefly ask, early on, we here at Soul Teachers decided to become non-political, primarily because we find politics to be divisive rather than building community. And And I'm interesting. I'm interested. You recently told me in a conversation that you're trying to be less political publicly, and it's funny because I know that during the past presidential campaign you were really political, and I was too, and we disagreed on things. But can you talk about why you made that choice to avoid politics?
Well, it was in another setting not too long ago. It's the first time I really came to where I was. That I am extremely, I'm a hard libertarian. You could call me an anarchist. No government for me would be beautiful. All these things. So anything, and part of it is from the blood. The Anabaptists were persecuted all through history in the back, and the state hunted them and killed them like animals. So some of that stuff to me is just, it's a heritage. That you just don't trust the state or whatever. But it. Just recently, I had made some offhand comments to in another interview, and about President Trump and some things that and then he later asked if it was off the record, it wasn't recorded or anything. And at that point, I just thought to myself, why the country is polarized down pretty much the middle or close to the middle. Why do I want to antagonize potential buyers of my works? And so it pretty much was a decision that everything comes down to economics. I'll still be a little political now and then on Facebook once in a while. Nothing like it used to be. Very, 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 very calm compared to that. But it still is. If I'm producing something for the market, which is a writing, which is a book, which is the first one is called Growing Up Amish. Second one, the title hasn't been completely confirmed. It'll probably be something. One of the phrases is going to be broken roads, because that's what I've traveled most of my life, or a lot of my life is just along broken roads. But to have a book. Now again, I lost my thread.
You were just saying why you chose to quit talking about politics.
Oh, that there's people on both sides of the political divide that I would want them to read my story. I want them to buy my book. And so if I go out there and here on this show and tell you whatever, that's going to antagonize 25, 30, 50% of your listeners. Right. Why would I want to do that? So it's, in a sense, it's pragmatic. In the other sense, it's just, it's more peaceful,
I think one of,
you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
It's just like, you know what, you can choose to walk, you can choose to not hear the noise all the time. You can choose your own, what you'll pay attention to, what you won't, and you can choose to walk, what I say walk free, which is, nobody walks totally free, but you can choose, cut just to block out noise. And that's part of the reason.
Yeah.
Because it gets so noisy.
Yeah.
It just does.
So there's a question we always ask our guests, and I think it's particularly relevant to you. And here it is. What's the hardest thing you had to learn in life in order to become the person you are, a writer, a memoirist? What difficult lesson was critical to becoming the person you are today?
Oh, my, baby, I should have looked at those questions before you asked them. Oh, my. So what was it?
What was the hardest thing you had to learn in life in order to become the person you are today?
Oh,
the hardest lesson, I think, probably is what I'm after.
You mean the actual, well, I would say, I don't know. I would say probably for me, like I said, the trauma of the marriage blowing up was what created my writing voice. And for me, to become who I am today, a great deal of that development came from the choice of forgiveness in many things that happened, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that defining thing, had I chosen another route, might have, it opened my heart. When my first book came out, it came out almost precisely the right time. 2 or 3 years earlier, there would have been more bitterness in it. 2 or 3 years later, the market might not have been what it was. Whatever. I just think it was, when the moment came, there was the book. You know? And much of that was just simply working in my own self, things you can't control, things that were just to walk free. You know, you can just walk free. And that's probably what I would consider it. If you, among many other things, of course. I mean, life is, multifaceted.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful answer. So I'm wondering if you could take us out by reading a bit from your writing. If you could tell a bit what's happening before the scene, and then just read something maybe.
Okay. Yeah, I had you had mentioned a little bit about reading. I don't do a lot of public reading. I mean, some, I guess, but in the book, probably about halfway through, I had left home, come back a couple times, and the third time I left was with my best friend. His name was Marvin Yutzi. He's actually my brother-in-law now. He married my younger sister in the book. I mean, the story's in the book. But at this point, it's kind of in the winter, and me and Marvin are making plans to get out of there. You know, we want to go to Florida, which we eventually did. And this is writing about one evening at home, a scene that happened between me and my father. And the funny thing about it was, when I wrote this, I mean, I'd never forgotten it, but when I wrote it for this manuscript, I was like, I wonder if that's, are they going to discard a little detail like that? But it seemed like, you know what, just tell it. And it's really I consider it an important scene in the book. So anyway, I'm getting ready to go to bed. Dad's sitting there reading the paper, and this is what happens between us. So reading through, they all knew we were going, our families, even though we never came out and said so. They could tell. Then one evening, after everyone else had already retired, I got up. Let me turn the page. Got up to get ready for bed. Dad was sitting on the couch reading the budget. As I walked by him, he cleared his throat, his classic method of triggering a conversation. I stopped and looked at him. He cleared his throat again. I have a question for you. He paused. I stood there silently looking at him. Will you be around over the winter and to help with farming in the spring? That was it. A simple question. But I was astounded. It was the first time in my life that Dad gave even the slightest indication that I might have a choice in the matter. It was the first time in my memory that such a subject was broached without all the strident admonitions of how I should straighten up, behave myself, and just settle down. I stood there, gaping at him, speechless. What had gotten into the man? He was asking me if I was going to leave or stay home to help with the farm work. In retrospect, I think, it was the first time ever that he spoke to me as a man to man. And that's why I was so surprised. Sad to say, I did not rise to the occasion. I stuttered a bit, hedging. I knew I was leaving. Our plans were firming up every day. It was just a matter of weeks now. Finally, I spoke. I don't know, I mumbled. It was a lie. Of course I knew. And he knew I knew. I just wasn't brave enough to tell him straight out. I wasn't used to being treated as if I had a thought of my own or choices. But he let it go. Well, it would be nice if we knew whether or not we'll need to hire some help this spring, he said. Then he turned back to his paper. Still stunned, I went off to bed. There it is.
Thank you so much, Ira. My guest today has been Ira Wagler. If you're interested in reading his memoir, you can find it anywhere memoirs are sold. If you'd like to keep up with him, he's on Facebook, and he's got his own website, www.irawagler.com. It's been a pleasure talking today, Ira. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining me on Soul Teachers. This episode was directed by Amy Wagner, produced by Andy Callender, edited by Brandon Fairbanks, and researched by Dr. Eric Bishop. Our theme music, Born, is by Over the Rhine. Our website, www.thesoulteachers.com, was built by each and every a design company in Kent, Ohio. You can find us wherever podcasts are hosted. We hope you'll like us on Facebook at The Soul Teachers. You can follow us on Twitter at teachers_soul. I'm your host, Stephen Denlinger.